Hello everybody, my name is Haj, and in today's video I will talk about how the Nikon Z9 woke up my 200 to 500 zoom lens from its deep sleep. When I just got this lens a couple of years ago, it was glued on my D7200 camera. It's a great lens. It is affordable. The zoom makes it very versatile. I like also the short minimum focusing distance, which is quite handy in some situation. The weight and size I still find manageable, given that it covers actually the focal length from 200 to 500 millimeter. I liked it even more once I upgraded my camera to the D850 and the D500, especially on the D500. The combo D500 and this lens make actually a very good on the budget wildlife kit. But things have changed since I got Nikon prime lenses. Those professional grade lenses like this 300 millimeters 2.8 are very addictive. Suddenly I found out how slow the autofocus on the zoom lens was. It also became apparent that a lens can be much sharper than this lens. In addition, each amount of light that you got from a fast prime lens can make a difference of getting the shot or not getting the shot. And therefore the zoom lens started to just stay in the corner and gather dust at home. I mean, the 200 to 500 zoom lens, it's not a soft lens, and once it's coupled with the D500, it's not a sloth at all in terms of autofocus. But it just does not compare to a prime lens like the 300 millimeters 2.8 or a 500 millimeters f4. And the difference is even more apparent once you attach a 1.4 teleconverter on the lens. I understand that the importance of sharpness is quite relative depending on the subject and on the photographer. For example, I have the 105 millimeters 1.4 lens, and I find it actually too sharp for my liking. I kind of prefer the rendering of the old 135 millimeters f2 DC lens actually. Sharpness might not also be critical for a subject which does not have fine details, like for example cars. The image will not gonna benefit much from a sharper lens. But when it comes to bird photography, you want to have as much detail as possible on the bird's fur. In addition, abundant light is often not the most flattering light to photograph, and faster shutter speed is kind of the general rule when it comes to action photography. So the lower light and the faster shutter speed are actually pushing your ISO, and high ISO could compromise the sharpness and the quality of the image. A one stop of light might not sound much when you talk about the lower spectrum of the ISO. For example, you will not see much difference between a photo taken at ISO 100 and a photo taken at ISO 200. But the difference becomes apparent once you compare photos taken at ISO 2000 and photo taken at ISO 4000. Also, I was never a fan of how this lens rendered the background. I find the bokeh of this lens a little bit too busy for my taste. Especially that I always top down a little bit for maximum sharpness. And once I use a 1.4 teleconverter on this lens, I only find the image acceptable once I stop down the lens to f11. So I'm losing quite a lot amount of light. and the background get even busier. And finally, lens calibration. Back in the DSLR days, it was very important to calibrate the lens. And the Nikon zoom lens are a pain to calibrate because you can only calibrate it at one specific focal length. But good news is, since the mirrorless era, calibration is a thing of the past. Also, I started to be curious about things I never did with DSLR camera, like taking videos or stacking teleconverters, which you can find in this video. And although I did not do a rigorous autofocus speed test, I kind of had the feeling that the Nikon Z9 does not really care that the lens have a teleconverter attached to it or not, as long as it receives enough light, and then it will work pretty well actually. So 2 weeks ago, I filmed birds with my 600mm f4. On the first day, I was using a monopod. It works great for photos, but the footage was a little bit too shaky. So the next day, I decided to bring a tripod instead, and it improved the video drastically. However, it was quite cumbersome to carry around and quite slow to set up. And the bird spotted me quite early and ran away before I could even make a better interest in composition. So last weekend I decided to undust my 200 to 500mm lens. I attached the 1.4 teleconverter on it, feared that I would not have enough reach, and I decided to use it with the Z9 handheld for taking videos and also for taking still. I find the footage from the setup quite nice actually. I think it's stable enough. For example, have a look at this pantomime heron. If it's not the wind which is blowing the feather on the back of the bird, you might even confuse it with a still image. And because I record the clip at 100 frames per second, once I slow down a little bit the frame rate in post, the video is even better. But the things that excited me the most was when I spotted this pheasant. It reminded me of that moment when I took picture of this pheasant last autumn, and I was struggling to keep track of the birds and decided to get the Nikon Z9 instead. Yes, it's not a direct comparison because in that image I was using a 600mm lens, and this time I would use then a zoom lens of 200 to 500mm. But of course it will still give a rough idea if the money was well spent or just been wasted, right? So first thing first, autofocus. As I mentioned in my first review of the Z9, do not expect a miracle. If the subject is too small and too far away, of course the camera will struggle to identify it. Same thing if the bird is completely hidden and you just see the back or like the tip of the head. Of course, it's not easy to keep track of the animal. But I just say I still come home with hundreds of sharp pictures, while back when I was using the D850 and the 600mm last autumn, I barely managed to get one nice picture of the pheasant. The autofocus of the combo Nikon Z9 and the zoom lens is actually much better than the autofocus of the combo D850 and the 600mm f4 lens, which is quite amazing. Also, in contrary to what happened last weekend, while I was carrying my big tripod and my big lens. This time the bird was not feeling bothered by my presence. It even approached quite close at some point that I had to zoom out a little bit. Something which would not be possible if I would have used a big prime lens. I would have to step back instead, and probably I would have scared the bird away. I also find it great that the autofocus on the mirrorless cameras are the same no matter you use the viewfinder or actually the live view screen. Because with the DSLR camera, the Nikon live view screen is completely useless when it comes to bird photography. It is too slow. So to take, for example, this picture, I was putting the lens and the camera on the ground like this. And then I was using the tilt screen of the Z9 to focus and to take pictures. I find it great that I did not have to lay down on the ground in cold winter to take picture of the bird. And in terms of sharpness, I will just let you judge it from this picture. In my opinion, I find the sharpness of this image very good actually. This image was taken with the lens with the teleconverter attached to it, wide open, so at f8. And I don't really understand why, but it seems like this lens is actually sharper on the Nikon Z9. One possible explanation is because maybe the lens does not need to be autofocus fine-tuned. So the lens is then actually at its full potential, but also the distance between the subject and me, the photographer, and the camera might have also play an important role here. So long story short, I'm very impressed with the Nikon Z9 and this zoom lens. I think I will gonna start to use it more often now, and it will stay in my kit until the Rimmer 200 to 600 millimeters Z lens come out. Maybe then, who knows, I might even gonna get rid of my big prime lenses. Only time will tell, and until next time then, bye.